of it in 1 second. First, let us talk about the fact that you don't want to go to an auto parts store. Because why would you? What's so great about an auto parts store? You're just going to stand in line, then you're going to get to the front of the line, then finally, they're going to tell you that they have to order the part online, and then they're going to upcharge you for it. Instead, here is something you could do. You could just skip the middleman. Why not just go to rockauto.com? It's much easier than walking into the store and people demanding quick answers and then ordering the part online. Instead, just go to rockauto.com and get the part yourself. Rockauto.com always offers the lowest prices possible rather than changing prices based on what the market will bear, the way that airlines do. Why would you spend up to twice as much for the same parts? Let's say, hypothetically, you happen to need, like, I don't know, a Delphi FG1456 fuel pump assembly for a 2005 to 2010 Honda Odyssey. I don't know why that just popped into my head, but it did. It costs like $354 at a big chain store. That's the kind of thing you could get at Rock Auto for $217. RockAuto.com is a family business serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. Head on over to RockAuto.com to shop for auto and body parts from hundreds of manufacturers. Best of all, prices at RockAuto.com are always reliably low, and the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. So, head on over to RockAuto.com right now. They've got amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. Head on over, write Shapiro in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. RockAuto.com. Go check them out. Okay, so these two members of Congress have now issued a series of letters to common carriers telling them they want them to essentially boot Fox News off the air, and OANN, and Newsmax. And this is the same sort of top-down censorship that you are seeing called for by our establishment media against social media, right? Let's force social media not to disseminate information we don't like. And there are a variety of games they play in order to shut down stuff they don't like. You'll notice one of the things that they have done, and this is a pretty clever sleight of hand. A lot of this debate really started after the 2016 election. In fact, nearly all of it. Before 2016, there was a basic acknowledgement that there were alternative points of view that were going to be presented online. There are alternative points of view that were going to be presented on podcasts and talk radio. And that was annoying to the left, but they understood that, you sort of had to just deal with it. And then after 2016, there was this moment where the left decided, you know what? We shouldn't have lost that election. In fact, we didn't lose that election. The only reason we lost that election is because of Russian disinformation. Now, disinformation, foreign intervention, using false information in order to pervert the political process, is in fact not something that the government has to just leave alone. Now, foreign disinformation is something the government can step into. It does have First Amendment consequences, but there's some precedent for the government stepping in and stopping foreign actual interference with disinformation. But you'll notice that there's a verbal sleight of hand that went on, where the media and Democratic members of Congress and Democrats in power, they decided to shift from Russian disinformation to misinformation. Now, there's a difference between disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is active promotion of false material by a foreign government. That's what disinformation typically is, right? You do disinformation on the Soviets, or the Soviets do disinformation on you. Misinformation is information that you perceive to be mistaken. There's no obvious intent for somebody to lie. It's just something you perceive to be mistaken. And so what the left does is they declare everything they don't like misinformation. If there's a narrative they don't like, that's misinformation. So they've now shifted over from fringe sort of issues when it comes to speech, foreign disinformation, the Russian government promulgating falsehoods in the middle of an election, to core political speech, which they then term misinformation. And then they set up a whole body of fact checkers whose sole design, apparently, is to label anything they don't like, not only misinformation, but mostly false. And this is what you see at PolitiFact. PolitiFact will label Barack Obama's statement that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor half true for several years, and then only later will they be like, oh yeah, that was the lie of the year. It becomes misinformation when it is convenient for them. And then they use those fake fact checkers, those pseudo fact checkers, as an excuse to shut down outlets they don't like on social media and to suppress their reach. Or they go to YouTube and they say, you know what? We know that there are a lot of people out there who like conservative material, but we are afraid that that conservative material will lead to incitement. How? Well, it's not even that those people are doing anything that incites violence. It's not that Jordan Peterson does anything that incites violence. It's that you might watch a Jordan Peterson video, and then maybe you'll get dragged into a rabbit hole of right-wing extremism. Okay, so they're consistently broadening out exceptions under American law that do exist to free speech, and then they're letting the exception eat the rule, right? So they will say incitement is illegal. It's true, incitement is illegal. Then they will say, that stuff that you're saying, like normal political stuff, that's incitement. Or they will say, yeah, we understand that your narrative is opinion and it's protected, but it's really misinformation. And misinformation is really kind of like disinformation, and disinformation is something that the government can fight. So really, your speech is like Russian disinformation. Okay, this is the way that the left goes about their top-down censorship. And it is tied into an ideology that suggests revolutionary aggression against the system, because the system of individual rights is inherently discriminatory according to the woke left. The woke left says that individual rights are biased because the people who are in a position to best exercise their individual rights are the powerful in our society. And those people must be brought to heel. So individual rights take a backseat to what the collective requires. Individual rights take a backseat to equity. And this is the language that you hear from the left. Again, these are the elements of authoritarianism. Revolutionary aggression, top-down censorship, and certainly the most prevalent feeling on the left is that if you disagree with them, it is because you are a moral lesser. It is because there's something wrong with you. It is because you believe in brutality. You're a phobe, right? You're a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. You're a hater. Okay, the authoritarianism on the left in the United States is very, very dominant at this point in American life, and it's becoming more dominant every day. So here's this letter from these two members of Congress, again, directed at taking down political opponents. Here's a letter to John Stanky. Stanky is the CEO of AT&T. Dear Mr. Stanky, and again, this comes from two sitting members of Congress. Our country's public discourse is plagued by misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and lies. Look at the conflation there. Some of those things, like Russian disinformation, are things the government has a say in. Misinformation is not, because you can define that however you want. Conspiracy theories. Depends on what you think is a conspiracy theory, right? And lies. Well, I mean, the left lied throughout the summer that America's police are systemically racist. They don't seem to care about that lie very much. These phenomena undergird the radicalization of seditious individuals who committed active insurrection on January 6th, and it contributes to a growing distrust of public health measures necessary to crush the pandemic. Right, so the idea here is that we would have crushed the pandemic if it were not for misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and lies. Weird, because every single Democratic member of Congress, so far as I'm aware, backed mass protests in the middle of the pandemic because they said that racial issues were a public health problem. In any case, these members of Congress say we are concerned about the role AT&T plays in disseminating misinformation, again, it's that sleight of hand, misinformation, to millions of its U-verse, DirecTV, and AT&T TV subscribers. And we write to you today to request additional information about what actions AT&T is taking to address these issues. Now notice, Congress does not have the power to regulate AT&T into shutting down free speech. That'd be a violation of the First Amendment. So instead, they will send nasty, threatening letters to places like Comcast and AT&T, and they will basically say, you know, nice company you got there. It'd be a real shame if something happened to it. Real shame if something happened to AT&T over there. We have been looking into like these other sort of antitrust issues, and I can tell you that if you weren't doing this fostering of misinformation, well then maybe we would stop looking into that. I'm not threatening you or anything, of course. It's not a threat. I mean, this is the way the game is played now. Nearly half of Americans get their news primarily from TV, say these two members of Congress. However, not all TV news sources are the same. Some purported news outlets have long been misinformation rumor mills and conspiracy theory hotbeds that produce content that leads to real harm. Now we get the incitement argument, right? Is if there's information that you don't like, or if there are even things that are not true that are said that you don't like, that those are necessarily incitement. That's not true. Lots of things are said in American public discourse every day. And we have laws against things like slander and libel, so you can sue people based on some of those things. We have incitement statutes that are on the books. Those incitement statutes require actual incitement, not just people saying things that are false. You will also note that these Democrats have no problem with the radical level of things that are not true being said on places like CNN and MSNBC. For full on a year, we heard that Andrew Cuomo was the greatest governor on planet Earth. CNN reported that the kids from Covington Catholic were vicious racists. Covington, the mainstream establishment media, pushed the idea that Brett Kavanaugh was a rapist. None of those things ended up being true. Doesn't matter. Right? It's only one type of quote-unquote misinformation you'll know that they're very upset about. Misinformation on TV has led to our current polluted information environment that radicalizes individuals to commit seditious acts and rejects public health best practices, among other issues, in our public discourse. And so, again, the idea is that if you allow things I don't like, then the public discourse is polluted. Okay, well, it may very well be polluted. Seriously. I'll acknowledge that there's information in the public discourse that I think pollutes the public discourse. For example, if a member of the SNL cast puts out the overt lie that the state of Israel has been not handing out vaccines to its Arab citizens, that seems like something that pollutes the public discourse. Do I have any right to call for SNL to be canceled on that basis? Should I call for if I were a member of Congress, would I have the ability, constitutionally speaking, to regulate that? Of course not. There's a lot of stuff in the public discourse that is chaff, and then there is some that is wheat, and it is your job to distinguish between the two. But the authoritarian left believes it is their job to distinguish for you and then use their power to cram down in censorious fashion exactly what they like. So, say these Congress people, experts have noted that the right-wing media ecosystem is, quote-unquote, much more susceptible to disinformation, lies, and half-truths. Well, I mean, if they say so, wow, I mean, amazing how they came to that conclusion. It's just the right-wing media ecosystem that's susceptible to disinformation, lies, and half-truths. Doesn't matter that for 4 long years, a vast bulk of Democrats believed that the 2016 election was stolen. Right-wing media outlets like Newsmax, One American News Network, and Fox News all aired misinformation about the November 2020 election. For example, both Newsmax and OANN ran, quote, incendiary reports of false information following the elections and continue to support an angry and dangerous subculture that will continue to operate semi-openly. As a violent mob was breaching the doors of the Capitol, Newsmax's coverage called the scene a sort of romantic idea. Fox News, meanwhile, has spent years spewing misinformation about American politics. Notice the conflation there, right? Fox News is exactly the same as Newsmax, is exactly the same as OANN. And I do love that apparently Newsmax calling the scene a quote-unquote sort of romantic idea, which is not a good thing to say. That apparently is the sort of offense that should get Newsmax taken off AT&T. However, CNN, which overtly promoted riots in the middle of the summer, I mean, Chris Cuomo went on television and he said, where does it say in the Constitution that protest is supposed to be peaceful? And somehow that didn't promote, right? It's only one side of the aisle, you'll note. These same networks, say these Congress people, have also been key vectors of spreading misinformation related to the pandemic. A media watchdog found over 250 cases of COVID-19 misinformation on Fox News in just one 5-day period. Economists demonstrated Fox News had a demonstrable impact on non-compliance with public health guidelines. They actually didn't. We studied that at the time. The evidence that Fox News was directly responsible for people not wearing masks, for example, is exorbitantly weak. They couldn't even link the people who are not wearing the mask to people who are watching, for example, Sean Hannity. One online platform suspended and demonetized OANN's channel online because it was spreading COVID-19 misinformation. Newsmax has amplified allegations that members of the Chinese Communist Party helped to develop the COVID-19 vaccine. That's the big one that you came up with, Newsmax? Is that Newsmax said that maybe the CCP had something to do with the development of the virus? Okay, in reality, there's a fairly good amount of information that this thing, while not created by the CCP, was in fact leaked from a Wuhan lab. There's more information to that suggestion than there is to the idea that it came from the wet markets, as we were originally told, and some idiot ate a bat. But, say these members of Congress, sadly these facts are not new. One popular television show aired a segment about OANN last April that included a dire warning. The kind of misinformation OANN is spewing right now could end up getting people killed. Oh wow, you quoted Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Amazing. If John Oliver says it, it must be true, because John Oliver is a super reliable source. We'll continue with the censorship that the Democrats are now pushing. This is authoritarian stuff. And it can come with a happy face. But the happy face does not make it any sort of, it does not mean that these people are in favor of liberty. They absolutely are not. We'll get to more on this in just one second. First, if you want to save time and you want to save money, there's a great way to do it. Don't go to the post office. Like, the post office is great, but let's be real. You can do all the things that you do at the post office cheaper and by spending less time at Stamps.com. I recommend mailing and shipping online at Stamps.com. Stamps.com will allow you to mail and ship anytime, anywhere, right from your computer. You can send letters, ship packages, and pay a lot less with discounted rates from USPS, UPS, and more. Here at Daily Wire, we've been using Stamps.com since 2017. We're not wasting our time. Stamps.com brings the services of the U.S. Postal Service and UPS directly to your computer. It's a must-have for any business. You use your computer to print official U.S. postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send it. Once your mail is ready, you just schedule a pickup or you drop it off. It is indeed that simple. With Stamps.com, you get discounts of up to 40% off post office rates and up to 62% off UPS shipping rates. Not to mention, Stamps.com is a fraction of the cost of those expensive postage meters. Stamps.com is a no-brainer. It saves you time, it saves you money. It's no wonder 1 million small businesses already use them. So, stop wasting your time. Go to Stamps.com. No risk. With my promo code Shapiro, you get a special offer. It includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and digital scale. No long-term commitments, no contracts. Just head on over to Stamps.com. Click on that microphone at the top of the homepage. Type in Shapiro. That is Stamps.com. Promo code Shapiro. Stamps.com. Never go to the post office again. Alrighty, so now we get to the crux of the matter from these Democratic Congress people. So they've spent most of this letter so far yelling about how they don't like Fox News and OANN and Newsmax and how they're spewing misinformation. Now, I've talked about some of the things I think that OANN and Newsmax in particular were pushing about the election that were not true, that I saw no evidence for. And in fact, OANN has been forced to back off some of its allegations with regard to Dominion, same thing with Newsmax. Okay, all of that is true because there are slander and libel laws in the United States. Both of them, I believe, are currently being sued by Dominion. That is the system working. I'll tell you what is not the system working. Sitting members of Congress looking to have platforms deplatform things they don't like. That's dangerous stuff. That's authoritarian stuff. That's top-down censorship in full authoritarian leftist mode. So here's what these Congress people say. Remember, this is a letter to the head of AT&T. Yet, to our knowledge, the cable, satellite, and over-the-top companies that disseminate these media outlets to American viewers have done nothing in response to the misinformation aired by these outlets. AT&T currently carries Fox News, Newsmax, and OANN on Uverse, DirecTV, and AT&T TV. As a company that serves 17 million Americans, AT&T plays a major role in the spread of dangerous misinformation that enabled the insurrection of January 6th and hinders our public health response to the current pandemic. In other words, if you don't mirror what we believe that you should shut them down. Now, notice what they're doing. Again, Congress cannot pass a law restricting freedom of speech. But members of Congress can pressure companies like AT&T into restricting freedom of speech. They're essentially turning these companies into their agents in order to shut down free speech, which is authoritarian stuff. It really is. It is government working hand in glove with corporations to shut down your freedom of speech. Corporations know this, by the way. Why do you think that Coca-Cola is doing diversity training? They're doing so for fear of liability. They're doing so because they're afraid they're going to be sued and that you're going to get some lefty judge who decides that discrimination has taken place because they didn't insulate themselves by buying a $20,000 Robin DiAngelo bullcrap course. The reason Coca-Cola is doing this is that the Democrats leave them alone. Right? The reason that all of these corporations are caving to the woke mob is because the woke mob has the levers of power in a wide variety of institutions right now. Not just at the top of corporations, where there are a lot of people who head corporations who are sympathetic to the woke mob, but they have the whip hand when it comes to the media. They have the whip hand when it comes to the social media companies. And most of all, they have the whip hand when it comes to members of Congress who are willing to shut down free speech. Not formally through passage of a law, but through simple outside pressure. So, say these Congress people, it is for these reasons we ask you provide us with responses to the following questions about AT&T's policies toward content carried on Uverse, DirecTV, and AT&T. What moral or ethical principles do you apply in deciding which channels to carry or when to take adverse actions against a channel? They're deliberately, these are not questions directed at eliciting answers, of course. These are questions elicited directed at eliciting a response, namely the cancellation of all of these outlets that Anna Eshoo and Jerry McNerney don't like. 2, do you require through contracts or otherwise that the channels you carry abide by any content guidelines? If so, please provide a copy of the guidelines. How many of your subscribers tune into Fox News, Newsmax, and OANN on Uverse, DirecTV, and AT&T TV for each of the 4 weeks preceding the November 3rd, 2020 elections? Please specify the number of subscribers that tuned in to each channel. And you know, that is the predicate for them setting up some sort of liability argument, as though AT&T is liable for damage done at the Capitol building because there were morons who decided to commit criminal acts on the basis of speech that may or may not have been true, but certainly did not meet the standard of legal incitement. What steps did you take prior to, on, or following the November 3rd, 2020 elections to monitor, respond to, and reduce the spread of disinformation, including encouragement or incitement of violence by channels your company disseminates to millions of Americans? Please describe each step that you took. Have you taken any adverse actions against a channel, including Fox News, for using your platform? Have you ever taken actions against a channel for using your platform to disseminate disinformation? Are you planning to continue carrying Fox News, Newsmax, and OANN? Okay, these are members of Congress who are overtly attempting to shut down the dissemination of information because they don't like these channels. Okay, all of this led to Federal Communications Commissioner Brendan Carr calling this effort a chilling transgression of free speech. He wrote a letter to them. He said, by writing letters to cable providers and other regulated entities that carry these news media outlets, the Democrats are sending a message that is as clear as it is troubling. These regulated entities will pay a price if the targeted newsrooms do not conform to Democrats' preferred political narratives. This is a chilling transgression of the free speech rights that every media outlet in this country enjoys. He says, debate on matters of public interest should be robust, uninhibited, and wide open. More speech is better than less. Yet the concerted effort by Democrats to drive political dissent from the public square represents a marked departure from these First Amendment norms. A newsroom's decision about what stories to cover and how to frame them should be beyond the reach of any government official, not targeted by them. He says, to the House Democrats that used their official letterhead to launch this inquiry, I would say this. Your demand to know the quote-unquote moral principles that guide a private entity's decision about what news to carry cannot be reconciled with bedrock principles of free speech and journalistic freedom. I call on my FCC colleagues to join me in publicly denouncing this attempt to stifle political speech and independent news judgment. But here's the thing. The Biden administration is happy with this sort of stuff. The Biden administration has never sounded off in favor of free speech principles. And and this doesn't apply even internally to media outlets on the left. Media outlets on the left are happy to fire people who cross them. And whether you're talking about the New York Times deciding to get rid of Don McNeil for the grave sin of using the N-word in a conversation about why you shouldn't use the N-word, or today, the big story is that Slate decided that they were going to get rid of a guy named Mike Pesca. Okay, now Slate is a very left-wing outlet. Mike Pesca committed a sin, a grave sin. What did he do? He used the N-word in describing why you should not use the N-word. According to Defector.com, Mike Pesca, host of Slate's daily podcast, The Gist, has been suspended from the company indefinitely. Sources confirmed that Pesca's indefinite suspension is without pay and that his access to the company's Slack and email channels had been revoked. The memo announcing Pesca's suspension, sent by Slate CEO Dan Check, refers obliquely to a conversation that took place in Slack last week. Defector has obtained images of the Slack conversation that Check's memo refers to, in which Pesca argues a point he has previously gotten into hot water for arguing, that in some contexts, white people should be allowed to say the N-word. Okay, again, this was in a discussion of the Don McNeil story from the New York Times. So, Pesca argued that McNeil's journalism made the Times more valuable to more Americans than having ousted him in 2019 would have. He said, "My points are his internal conduct was in a gray area. You guys don't think it was." He said, "Expressing the views, not the word. The views he did on that trip are not fireable. Worthy of talking to, or what are you doing as a representative of the Times, but nothing requiring much angst among management or staff. Or no, should the Times discipline staffers who question the idea of white supremacy or who express retrograde ideas on mass incarceration? The question is an out-loud utterance of that word in a work environment fireable, censurable, etc., even as a point of clarification to a question exactly about the use of that word?" And this led to him essentially being fired. Pesca made a final point. "I don't think it's proper to use it in casual conversation, the N-word. I'm in no position to tell black New York Times workers they shouldn't be worried it's going to pop out of a colleague's mouth at some point. If you want my opinion, it's that there are some limited reasons why a non-African-American journalist or professor would use that word when conveying a quote in the name of clarity or factualness. But it's not a comfortable point to even pursue right now. If I had the opposite opinion, I know 100 ways I could make the opinion I actually have seem horrible and racist, and you know what? Maybe it is." So that's when the boss chimed in and said, "Maybe we should stop this conversation." And a Slate staffer said, said this, quote, "I feel outraged. I cannot believe I had to watch him enthusiastically provoke people on whether or not it is appropriate to use a racist slur." Other Slate staffers that spoke to Defector expressed frustration and anger at Pesca's insistence on having that particular conversation. Quote, "I don't want to be in a workplace where people feel emboldened to have this argument. People's humanity is not an intellectual debate." Okay, Slate editor-in-chief Jared Holt then posted a message in Slack saying he didn't ever want to see a similar argument in Slack ever again. Ever again. He said, "While we are a workplace where people argue about things all the time, it's also a workplace where we must think very hard about the lived experience of colleagues whose experience is different than ours." Pesca's been suspended for a week, and then it has been suspended, upgraded to indefinite. This is insane. This is insane. And by the way, according to Holt, he said that if Pesca had actually used the N-word, he didn't even use the N-word, by the way, in this conversation, so revision. He didn't even use the N-word. He said there might be situations in which using the N-word is not a fireable offense, because you are quoting somebody, for example. Holt said that if Pesca had used the N-word, he definitely would have been fired. This is insane. Okay, and that staffer's shock apparently was not because people were upset about what the bosses were doing. It's because Pesca had actually said the N-word at work. Why? He said the N-word at work because he was quoting somebody. So then they've suspended him or fired him from Slate. Hey, this is the authoritarian left at work. And they have the upper hand in major corporations. On the left. Not just on the left. In major corporations across the board. So, for example, Ryan Anderson, an excellent thinker over at the Heritage Foundation who writes on trans issues, is a really, really good book. We've talked about it on the show. It's called When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Movement. And it is a logical, point-by-point debunking of many of the myths surrounding transgenderism and gender identity and the idea that gender is entirely malleable. He goes through all the science. Amazon pulled his book this week. So it's there's the best description of that would be a digital book burning. When you actually remove a book from Amazon, that is a digital book burning, because the goal of a book burning is to remove that book from circulation. They just removed it. That comes on the heels of just a few months ago, the attempt by Amazon to remove Abigail Schreier's book from their shelves. So now they're doing it to Ryan Anderson's When Harry Became Sally. Encounter Books, which is the publisher, they said, if Amazon, which controls most of the book sales in America, has decided to delist a book with which some of its functionaries disagree, this is an unconscionable assault on free speech. It will have a chilling effect on the publishing industry and the free circulation of ideas. It must not be left to stand unchallenged. That is 100% right. But again, the authoritarian left is on the march. The authoritarian left has cudgeled corporations into doing the censorious work government cannot do. They've gotten corporations to mirror their authoritarian priorities. We already know that the media mirror their authoritarian priorities. They cheer this stuff on day after day. We know that social media has begun mirroring those authoritarian priorities because they're being